In the middle of a Wyoming blizzard, a cowboy found a wild Mustang curled around something in the snow, and what she was protecting would break his heart wide open. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing across the frozen plains. Jack Mercer almost rode past her, a silver mare half buried in white, shielding a fragile shape beneath her body. In that moment, under the dying light of his lantern, the storm stopped being the most powerful thing in the world. The wind had a voice that night. It howled down from the Wind River Range, scraping across the plains like 1,000 ghosts trying to find their way home. Snow came sideways, fine as sand, sharp as glass, and covered everything that once had shape or color. Out there, where fences disappeared and the earth met the sky without a line between, Jack Mercer rode alone. His horse, a chestnut gelding named Boone, snorted steam into the freezing air. Jack leaned forward, coat collar pulled high, hat brim heavy with snow. The lantern hanging from his saddle swung and flickered like a heart losing strength. He'd seen storms before, ones that took roofs, cattle, sometimes men. But this one carried something different, something that felt personal. Jack had been a ranch hand, a rodeo rider, a man once full of laughter. Now he was just the quiet cowboy at the edge of Wind River, the one who didn't talk much since his wife and son died in a snowslide 2 winters ago. Folks still waved when they passed his small barn, but they didn't stop. Grief makes a man invisible. He had planned to ride out only far enough to check the fences, make sure the storm hadn't torn the south line down again. But as he turned Boone toward home, a sound broke through the wind, a high, desperate whinny, swallowed almost instantly by the blizzard. Boone's ears shot forward. Jack froze. It came again, softer this time, like something calling from beneath the snow. "Easy, boy," he murmured, tightening the reins. The storm clawed at his coat as he turned the horse toward the sound. Visibility dropped to a few feet. The world became a blur of white and noise. Then his lantern caught something, a shape on the ground. At first he thought it was a fallen elk, but as he slid from Boone's saddle, boots crunching into ice, he saw the shimmer of silver beneath the snow. It was a horse, a Mustang, young and lean, its coat pale as moonlight, body curled against the wind. Steam rose faintly from its nostrils, but the animal didn't move. Jack crouched, brushing snow from its flank. "Hey now, stay with me," he whispered. That was when he saw it, the slightest twitch beneath the horse's belly. Something moved there, too small to be another animal. He pushed his glove under the mare's side and felt fabric, then skin. He jerked his hand back, eyes wide. "Lord Almighty!" He dropped to his knees, shoveling snow away with both hands. Beneath the horse, a child, a boy maybe 6 years old, lay, curled in the hollow the mare had made, wrapped in a torn blanket, skin as white as the snow around them. His lips were blue, his eyelashes frozen together. For a heartbeat, Jack just stared. The horse had shielded the boy, bending its body into a wall against the storm. It hadn't run for shelter. It had stayed. Jack pressed 2 fingers to the child's neck. A pulse. Faint. Stubborn. The kind that refused to quit. "Hang on, kid," he muttered, stripping off his own coat. He wrapped it around the boy, then looked at the mare. "You did good, girl. Real good." The horse lifted her head weakly, eyes meeting his, amber and impossibly human. She exhaled, a long, slow breath that fogged the air between them, and lowered her head again, as if entrusting the boy to him. Jack didn't waste another second. He gathered the boy in his arms, light as a sack of grain, and turned to Boone. But the Mustang struggled, trying to rise. Jack hesitated, torn between saving the boy and leaving the creature that had kept him alive. "Come on," he urged, looping the lead rope around the mare's neck. "We all go, or none of us." Step by step, half dragging, half guiding, he led them through the whiteout. The boy's breath fluttered against his chest. The mare stumbled once, twice, then pushed forward again. Jack's own legs burned, lungs raw from cold. The storm swallowed every sound except the crunch of hooves and his own ragged breathing. After what felt like hours, the lantern glow hit wood, the side of his barn. Jack kicked the door open, shoving the boy inside onto a pile of old horse blankets. The Mustang collapsed just inside the threshold, legs folding beneath her. Jack slammed the door shut against the wind. For a moment, he just stood there, chest heaving, snow melting from his beard. The world outside screamed, but in here, it was quiet. He knelt beside the boy again, pressing his ear to the child's chest. Still breathing. Barely. He stoked the stove until flames roared, dragged it closer. Then he turned to the mare. She was shaking, eyes half-lidded, her breath shallow. Jack threw another blanket over her flank and rested a hand on her neck. "You're safe," he said softly. "Both of you." Boone stomped once in his stall, uneasy, but Jack barely noticed. He sat back against the wall, the child wrapped in his coat, the horse beside them. The storm pounded at the windows, trying to break in, but inside the small barn, a fragile warmth began to grow. Jack looked from the boy to the horse. 2 strangers. 2 survivors. And for the first time in a long while, something inside him, something buried under years of silence, stirred again. He whispered into the firelight, voice low and unsure. "I reckon the storm finally brought me home." Outside, the wind howled back, but softer this time, almost like an answer. The fire hissed and popped inside Jack Mercer's old barn, throwing thin ribbons of heat into the air. Outside, the Suakin storm clawed at the walls like it wanted back in, but the heavy wood held. Jack sat on the dirt floor with his back against the feed chest, his coat draped over the boy he'd found. The child's breathing came slow, shallow but steady now. His skin had color again, faint like sunrise behind fog. Jack didn't know what to do next. He hadn't held a living soul this small since his own son, Luke. That thought hit him like a boot to the ribs. He turned away from the fire and busied himself with the Mustang. The silver mare, he could see her better now under the lamplight, was covered in ice. Her flank rose and fell unevenly. Jack fetched warm water from the kettle and rubbed her down with an old towel. "You did something most men wouldn't," he said softly, half to her, half to the ghosts that watched from the rafters. "You stayed." The mare's ear twitched at his voice. Her coat shimmered with each motion of the cloth, and he noticed scars on her neck, thin, old lines like she'd once been roped hard and dragged. The sight stirred anger, but it wasn't new to him. He'd seen what people did to wild horses, how they broke them down until there was nothing wild left. He wasn't about to let that happen again. He dragged an extra bale of hay from the corner and made a bed for her near the stove. Boone, his gelding, snorted from the next stall, uneasy about sharing his space with a stranger. "Settle, boy," Jack said. "We've all had a long night." When the boy stirred, Jack moved quickly to his side. The child's eyes fluttered open, gray, unfocused, like someone waking from a long dream. He looked around the barn, then up at Jack. Where's she?" The voice was barely more than a whisper. "She's right here," Jack said, nodding toward the mare. "Still breathing. Thanks to her, you are too." The boy blinked slowly. She didn't leave me." "No," Jack said, throat tightening. "She didn't." He fetched a tin cup, filled it with warm milk, and held it to the boy's lips. The kid drank a little, then fell back into a half-sleep. Jack studied his small, frost-bitten hands. No gloves, just scraps of cloth. Whoever left him out there hadn't planned for him to live. When dawn came, the storm had finally broken. Pale light bled through the cracks in the wall. Jack stepped outside, squinting against the glare. The world looked washed clean, silent, white, and cruelly beautiful. He scanned the horizon. No tracks except his own, already half buried. Whoever had done this was long gone. Inside, the boy had woken fully. He sat near the fire, legs tucked under the blanket, eyes on the mare. Jack knelt beside him. "You remember your name, son?" The boy hesitated. "Eli." "That's a good name?" Jack smiled faintly, the first time in months. "I'm Jack." Eli nodded toward the horse. "She's cold. She needs to be warm." Jack glanced at the mare, still trembling, but upright now. He opened the stove door wider, letting the glow reach her. "She's tough," he said. "So are you." Eli studied the flames. "My mama said the wind talks in the mountains," he murmured. "Said it carries stories." Jack stared at the fire for a long time before answering. "Sometimes it carries people too." He didn't ask about the boy's mother. Not yet. There was time for that later. He focused instead on mending the cracked boards, pouring grain into a bucket, keeping his hands busy so his mind wouldn't wander where it shouldn't. As the day wore on, he noticed the mare's breathing had steadied. She even took a few bites of hay. When he came near, she didn't shy away. Her eyes followed him, calm but alert, like she was judging whether to trust him. Jack chuckled softly. "You and me both, girl." By evening, the clouds had thinned to gold. He led Boone out for water, then returned to find Eli crouched beside the Mustang, whispering to her. The horse lowered her head, almost as if listening. Jack watched from the doorway, snow melting from his hat brim, and for a moment he saw something so simple it hurt. A child and an animal, breathing the same air, healing each other without words. He turned back toward the fire and poured himself coffee that tasted like smoke. "All right," he muttered to no one. "We'll figure it out come morning." That night, as the wind softened to a sigh through the pines, Jack dreamed of his wife again, her voice saying, "You can't keep out the world forever." He woke before dawn, hand gripping his rifle. The barn was quiet except for the slow rhythm of 3 heartbeats. His, the boy's, and the horse's. He lay back down on the floorboards and listened to that fragile symphony until the first light of day touched the frost on the window. Somewhere deep in his chest, a warmth flickered to life, a small, stubborn spark that felt like the beginning of something he'd forgotten how to hope for. Outside, the snow had stopped hiding things. It was beginning to reveal them. Morning spilled softly through the cracks in the barn, painting thin stripes of gold across the hay. The storm had finally given up its fight, leaving the world outside buried under stillness. Jack Mercer stood by the open door, watching his breath curl in the cold. His property stretched in every direction, just white, endless and clean, like a page waiting for words. He had spent years avoiding new stories, but now there were two of them lying under his roof. One small and human, one wild and silver. He turned back inside. The boy, Eli, sat cross-legged near the stove, rubbing warmth into his hands. The Mustang stood nearby, her head low but steady. When the light hit her coat, it shimmered faintly, the color of smoke over water. Jack poured hot water into a dented tin cup, handed it to Eli. "Drink slow," he said. The boy nodded, eyes fixed on the horse. "She's watching us," Eli whispered. "She's making sure we're not the kind who run," Jack answered. That drew a half-smile from the child, the first real sign of life Jack had seen in him. Outside, Boone whinnied, impatient to be fed. Jack threw on his coat, but before he stepped out, he looked back at the two of them. The boy wrapped in an oversized blanket, the mare shifting her weight like she already belonged there. The barn, which had felt empty for years, suddenly looked lived in. By mid-morning, the sky turned pale blue. Jack repaired a broken latch on the gate and shoveled snow from the path to the well. The silence of the valley was deep enough to hear the faint groan of ice on the river miles away. He was used to this kind of quiet, the kind that made a man face himself. But now, every sound carried a new weight. The boy's small footsteps, the rustle of hay as the mare moved. Even the soft rattle of her breathing seemed to echo through him. When Jack returned, Eli had dozed off, cheek pressed against Whisper's flank. The mare didn't move. She stood still as stone, her chest rising in a slow, patient rhythm. Jack crouched beside them. He'd seen many wild horses, but none like her. There was a gentleness in the way she watched over the boy, protective, deliberate, like she understood something about him that no one else did. Jack reached out, brushing a few stray strands of mane away from her neck. Beneath the fur, he found a small scar shaped like a half-moon, pink against the gray. He frowned. "You've been through hell too, huh?" The horse flicked her tail, the only answer he needed. By afternoon, he coaxed both of them into the cabin behind the barn. It wasn't much. A single room, wood stove, a cot, and a table built from pine planks. The air inside smelled of cedar and dust. Eli stood near the threshold, hesitant, like stepping inside would erase the world he'd come from. "It's warmer in here," Jack said. "You can stay till we figure where you belong." Eli's eyes drifted to the framed photograph on the shelf. Jack's wife, Claire, and a boy with the same gray eyes he saw in the mirror every morning. Jack noticed and looked away. "That's my family," he said simply. "Been gone a while." "I'm sorry," Eli murmured. "Me too." They didn't speak again for a long time. The wind whispered against the windows, and the kettle began to hum. Jack cooked oatmeal, slid a bowl across the table. Eli ate quietly, and Whisper watched from the doorway, her breath fogging the air. Later, when the sun dipped low, Jack found himself sitting on the porch with a cup of black coffee. The silence of the evening settled around him like a blanket. Whisper stood out in the paddock, tail swaying. Eli was inside, curled under a quilt, asleep before sunset. Jack stared at the horse until her shape blurred against the fading light. He thought about the boy's hands. Too small, too scarred for his age. He thought about the rope, marks on the mare's neck, the way she flinched at sudden movement, and he wondered what kind of man could leave a child and an animal to die together in a storm. He whispered to himself, "You don't protect something that hard unless it means everything." The next morning came quiet and bright. Frost clung to the window panes like lace. Jack rose before dawn, fed the animals, and set out to find tracks that might tell him where Eli came from. The snow was deep and untouched. No prints, no tire marks, only the faint trail he and Boone had left 2 nights ago. It ended at a line of pines and vanished. When he came back, Eli was up, helping to brush Whisper's coat with the old curry comb Jack used on Boone. "She likes it," the boy said, smiling. "I can see that," Jack replied, taking in the sight. The mare's head was low, her eyes soft. She'd let the boy close without a hint of fear. Trust was a hard thing to earn in the wild, yet somehow the two of them shared it already. That night, as Jack sat by the fire, writing notes in an old weather log, Eli asked, "Are we staying here?" "For now," Jack said, "till I figure out what's right." Eli looked at him, eyes half hidden behind his hair. "It feels right already." Jack didn't answer. He closed the book, stared into the flames, and felt the quiet spread again. Not empty this time, but full, alive. The cabin walls creaked in the wind. Whisper stamped her hoof outside, settling into the hay. When Jack finally spoke, his voice was low, rough as gravel. "All right, kid. We'll make it work." The fire snapped softly, sealing a promise neither of them fully understood yet. The name came to him at sunrise. Jack was saddling Boone when he heard the faintest sound, a breath more than a voice, coming from the paddock. The Mustang stood in the half-light, Frost still clinging to her mane, her ears turning toward him. She exhaled softly, a sound that barely existed, like a secret carried on the wind. "Whisper," Jack said aloud. The name fit her the way dawn fits the mountains, quiet and certain. From that moment, it stuck. He spent the morning repairing the corral fence, while Eli fed Whisper bits of apple and brushed her coat. The boy spoke to her in a murmur only she seemed to understand. Jack watched from the porch, coffee steaming in his hand, wondering how 2 lost souls could bond that fast. Boone, his old gelding, had never let anyone near him except Jack. But this mare, wild and scarred, allowed a child to press his small palm against her neck, as if they'd known each other all their lives. "Guess you found your people," Jack muttered, shaking his head. By noon, the snow had begun to soften under the pale sun. Jack took his truck down the long dirt road into town, needing supplies and maybe answers. He stopped at the feed store, where Sheriff Nora Bell was buying salt blocks. She was his age, 40-something, with eyes that saw through you faster than any mirror could. "Jack Mercer," she said, arching an eyebrow. "Haven't seen you since the rodeo closed." He tipped his hat. "You're looking at a man with more mouths to feed than yesterday." "How many?" "2. One's got 4 legs." Her curiosity sharpened. "You taking in strays now?" Jack told her what he'd found in the storm, how the mare had shielded the boy, how both had barely made it through the night. He left out the part about how it changed him, how it made him feel something he thought had frozen for good. Nora frowned. "There's been reports of a wild horse roundup up near Echo Ridge. Illegal ones. Some folks trying to sell them across state lines." "Figures," Jack said, jaw tight. "That mare's got rope burns deep enough to tell her story." "And the boy?" He hesitated. "No tracks, no names? Just said his mama told him to run. Nora scribbled something in her notebook. I'll check missing persons. You keep them safe till I know more. She paused, voice softening. You sure you can handle that, Jack? You haven't exactly let people close since… He cut her off with a nod. Since a long time ago. I'll manage. Back at the ranch, the air smelled of thawing pine. Whisper met him at the gate, ears flicking forward, eyes bright again. Eli ran from the barn, waving. She let me ride her, Jack. Just a little. She didn't even buck. Jack dropped his supplies, half ready to scold, but stopped when he saw the boy's grin. Wide, honest, alive. He remembered Luke's face the day he first rode Boone without a lead rope. That same fierce joy. He let the moment stand. That so? Jack said. Guess she likes you better than she likes me. Eli laughed. Whisper turned her head toward Jack, as if denying it. That evening, they all ate in the cabin, Jack with his tin plate, Eli with a bowl of stew, Whisper just outside chewing hay in the fading light. The stove crackled, the world soft around them. Jack almost forgot the years that had gone silent. He even caught himself humming an old Cowboy tune. When Eli had gone to bed, Jack stepped outside. The moon floated high, casting silver over everything it touched. Whisper stood near the fence, her breath curling like smoke. Jack walked up to her, resting a gloved hand against her neck. You and that kid, he murmured. You pulled each other out of the snow, didn't you? She blinked slowly, eyes deep amber. Jack could almost hear her answer, not words, but something older, heavier, like the sound the earth makes when it forgives the rain. A rustle from the tree line broke the stillness. Whisper's ears shot up. Jack turned, scanning the darkness. For a moment, he thought it was nothing, just wind in the pines. Then a faint metallic clink echoed across the field. Chain links. His stomach tightened. He stayed motionless, watching, but the sound didn't come again. Easy, girl, he said, patting her. Jin sighed. Ghosts don't walk this far in daylight. He went back inside, but didn't sleep much. The next morning, he found a small patch of disturbed snow near the fence. Boot prints, half melted, leading away toward the ridge. Someone had been there, watching. He didn't tell Eli. He didn't tell Nora, not yet. Instead, he reinforced the gate and loaded shells into his rifle. Then he saddled Boone and took a slow ride along the ridge, eyes scanning the horizon for movement. Nothing. Just the endless quiet of winter. When he returned, Eli was sitting on the porch, sketching something in the dirt with a stick. Jack crouched beside him. What are you drawing? The storm, Eli said simply. He drew a big circle, then a small one inside it. That's me, that's her. She kept me safe. Jack stared at the drawing, the crude shapes pressed into the earth. It looked like a heart inside a larger heart. He ruffled the boy's hair and stood, staring toward the tree line again. The unease in his chest hadn't left. Whatever the storm had buried out there, it hadn't finished its work. As the sun dropped behind the ridge, Whisper raised her head, ears pricked toward the distance. The wind shifted, carrying a scent Jack couldn't place. Metal, smoke, and something else. He reached for his hat, squinting. What do you see, girl? Whisper didn't move. Her nostrils flared once, twice, and then she exhaled sharply, a sound closer to a warning than a sigh. Jack followed her gaze to the horizon. Out there, beyond the snowfield, a single black crow circled low and disappeared behind the ridge. The world was too quiet again. "Whatever you're telling me," Jack whispered. "I'm listening." He didn't know it yet, but that was the night the storm started to turn back toward them. The next morning broke sharp and cold, the kind of cold that cut through denim and bone. Jack Mercer was already awake, leaning on the fence rail, coffee steaming in his hand. The valley below was coated in a thin skin of ice. Beyond it rose Echo Ridge, long, low hills that caught the light like silvered scars. He'd always avoided that ridge. Folks said it echoed more than sound. It held memories. Whisper grazed quietly nearby, her breath misting the air. Eli ran circles around her, his laughter carrying through the morning like something fragile finally learning to live again. Jack smiled in spite of himself, but it didn't last. He couldn't shake the feeling from the night before, the boot prints, the sound of chains in the dark. After breakfast, he hitched up his truck, packed a rifle, and told Eli to stay close to the cabin. "If anyone shows up, you come find me first," he said. The boy's face tightened. "Will you come back?" "I always come back," Jack said, though he didn't know if it was true. The road to Echo Ridge was half buried in snow. Pines bowed under its weight, creaking as he passed. Jack parked by a fallen sign that once read Echo Ridge Reserve, Mustang Conservation Area. The word reserve had been shot through. He followed the trail on foot, boots crunching ice. After half a mile, he saw the tracks. Fresh, wide treads from truck tires, the kind used to haul livestock trailers. A metallic smell lingered in the air, faint but sharp. As he walked deeper, the world grew quieter. No birds, no wind. Even his own breath seemed to fade. Then he saw it, a clearing scattered with rope, broken harnesses, and a rusted metal gate chained shut. Jack knelt beside a patch of frozen ground, stained darker than snow. Blood. He rubbed it between his fingers, heart pounding. Whoever had been here had worked fast and dirty. A twig snapped behind him. He turned, rifle half raised. A figure stood at the edge of the trees. Sheriff Nora Bell, coat flapping, badge glinting weakly in the gray light. "Easy, cowboy," she said, lifting her hands. "I figured you'd come poking around." Jack lowered the gun. "You knew this was here?" "I knew about the permits, but this—" She gestured to the mess of ropes and tracks. "This is off the books. The Bureau shut this place down 2 years ago." Jack's jaw tightened. "Then who's running it now?" Nora crouched beside a pile of hoof prints, tracing their edges. "These aren't wild. They're shod. Someone's catching them and moving them fast." She looked up. "And your Mustang, Whisper, you said. She's one of them." Jack's stomach dropped. "They left her to die in the storm." "Maybe she escaped," Nora said. "Or maybe someone wanted her gone." They scoured the ridge for another hour, finding empty shells, cigarette butts, the carcass of a small coyote left to freeze. Finally, Nora stopped at the edge of a steep drop. "You hear that?" Jack listened. The wind moved through the rocks, carrying faint metallic groans, the echo of something heavy being dragged far below. He peered into the canyon and saw the glint of sunlight on metal. A truck bed, half buried in snow. "Looks like one didn't make it out," Nora said quietly. Jack climbed down, boots slipping on the ice. Inside the wreck, he found fragments of chain, torn cloth, and a leather tag stamped with 3 letters, WBR. "What's that mean?" he called up. Nora's voice drifted down. Wyoming Breeding and Research. It's private. Used to partner with the Bureau on animal testing. Closed after some scandal. Jack pocketed the tag. Guess they're not closed anymore. When they returned to the cabin, the sun was already bleeding into orange. Eli sat on the porch steps with Whisper's head in his lap. He looked up, relief flooding his face. "You're back." Jack smiled faintly. "Told you I'd come back." Nora crouched near the boy. "You been feeding her well, partner?" Eli nodded. "She only eats when I talk to her." "That so?" Nora said, glancing at Jack. "Looks like you've got yourself a pair of miracles." Jack didn't answer. He was staring at the scar on Whisper's neck again. Now that he'd seen the tags and the blood at Echo Ridge, the mark looked deliberate, like a brand someone tried to hide. He ran his thumb over it, feeling the faint pulse beneath the skin. Whisper flicked her tail, but didn't move away. That night, after Eli fell asleep, Jack and Nora sat by the fire. Outside, the wind had picked up again, moaning through the cracks like a restless spirit. "She's not just a stray," Jack said. "Someone made her that way." "You think they're still looking for her?" "I'd bet on it." Nora leaned back, eyes on the flames. "You could turn her over? Let me report it. Wouldn't blame you. She's trouble waiting to happen." Jack shook his head. "She saved that boy's life. I'm not handing her to the same kind of people who'd leave him out there." "You're risking a lot." He stared into the fire. "I already lost everything that mattered once. This time I'm holding on." Nora didn't argue. After a long silence, she stood and fastened her coat. "Then you'd better be ready. Trouble doesn't knock twice." When she left, the cabin felt smaller, heavier. Jack checked the locks, then knelt beside the window, watching the snow drift. Whisper stood outside under the moonlight, still as a statue. Her head lifted suddenly, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Jack followed her gaze toward the ridge. Far off, headlights flickered once between the trees, then vanished. He stayed there until the fire burned low, the old ache in his chest rising with every gust of wind. Out on the ridge, the echoes had started again, metallic, rhythmic, like someone hammering the silence back into shape. Night fell heavy and hollow across the valley. A thin sliver of moon hung over the ridge like a blade, and Jack Mercer could feel the weight of it in his chest. He had left the lantern burning low, casting long, shivering shadows across the cabin walls. Every creak sounded wrong tonight. Every gust of wind felt like a warning. He sat at the table cleaning his rifle, the old Winchester he hadn't touched since the day he buried his family. The metal was cold beneath his fingers, but his hands were steady. Boone stirred restlessly in the barn. Whisper was outside in the paddock, head lifted, eyes fixed toward the dark. She hadn't moved for 10 minutes. Eli slept on the cot, wrapped in the same quilt that once belonged to Jack's son. The boy's breath came slow and even, unaware of how the air itself had shifted. Jack poured a last cup of coffee, black and bitter, and told himself it was just nerves. But deep down, he knew what it meant when the animals stopped making noise. He was reaching for the lamp when it happened. A distant crack, sharp and hollow, followed by the faint echo of metal on metal. Then another. Jack's chair scraped the floor as he stood outside. Whisper neighed once, loud and terrified. Boone answered from the barn. Jack moved fast, kicking open the door, rifle in hand. The cold hit him like a slap. Snow was falling again, thick and silent. Through the haze, he saw movement near the gate. 2 figures in dark coats, flashlights cutting through the night. "Who's out there?" he shouted. No answer. One of the beams turned toward him, blinding white. Jack fired a warning shot into the air. The sound cracked the valley open. The figures dropped low, and one returned fire. The bullet struck the cabin's porch post, splintering wood. Jack ducked behind the railing, heart hammering. Another shot rang out, closer. Whisper screamed, rearing against the fence. Eli woke with a cry inside the cabin. Jack yelled, "Stay down!" Then sprinted toward the barn, snow crunching under his boots. He reached Whisper first. The mare's flank was slick with sweat despite the cold. Her eyes were wide, whites glinting in the dark. Jack unlatched the gate. "Go," he urged, slapping her haunch. "Get to the trees." But she refused to run. Instead, she turned sideways, pressing herself between Jack and the open field, like a living shield. "Damn it, girl," he muttered. "You're gonna get us both killed." A shout came from the shadows. "We just want the horse! Move aside!" Jack aimed toward the sound and fired again. The muzzle flash lit the snow for a heartbeat, revealing 3 men now, not 2. Their faces were hidden behind scarves, eyes cold and steady. The nearest one raised something that glinted under the moon, a tranquilizer gun. Whisper bolted forward with a scream that tore through the storm. The dart missed her by inches, embedding in the fence post. Jack fired back, the report echoing across the valley. 1 man fell, the others scattering behind the trees. Jack crouched low, lungs burning, vision swimming from the cold. Then he heard it, a second dart gun hissing. The shot struck true this time, sinking into Whisper's neck. The mare stumbled, legs folding. She tried to rise again, muscles trembling. "No!" Jack ran to her, grabbing the shaft and snapping it off, but the damage was done. Her breaths grew ragged, body swaying like a ship in wind. The attackers closed in, moving fast and low. Jack lifted the rifle, fired blind into the storm until the chamber clicked empty. Something heavy hit him from behind, a body slamming his shoulder. He went down hard, cheek against ice. Boots crunched beside his ear. "Stay down, old man," a voice hissed. Rough, southern accent. "Ain't about you. It's the horse." Jack twisted, throwing an elbow into the man's ribs and rolled away. He reached for his hunting knife and slashed upward, catching the attacker's coat. The man cursed, fell back, and Jack lunged for the barn door. "Eli!" he shouted. "Run!" The boy burst from the cabin, barefoot in the snow, eyes wide with terror. He ran straight for Whisper, who was still, fighting to stand. Jack saw the dart wound leaking a dark line down her shoulder, steaming in the cold. "Leave her!" Jack roared, but Eli didn't stop. He threw his small arms around the horse's neck, sobbing, "She's mine! You can't take her!" One of the hunters raised his gun again. Jack fired his last bullet, catching the man's leg. The stranger went down with a howl. The third man grabbed Eli by the arm and yanked him back. Whisper surged upward one last time, her hooves striking sparks against the frozen earth. She slammed into the man, sending him sprawling. The boy tumbled into the snow. Whisper stood over him, shaking, blood staining her coat. The dart in her neck pulsed with every heartbeat. She bent her head, nuzzled the boy's face once, as if to memorize him. Then a final shot split the air. Jack saw it happen in silence. The mare jerked, stumbled, and fell beside Eli. The snow caught her weight with a dull thud. Steam rose from her nostrils one last time, then faded. The hunters hesitated. One limped backward, dragging his wounded partner. "She's down. Let's go." Jack ran toward them, firing the pistol he'd taken from the fallen man, but they vanished into the dark, like smoke. The only sounds left were Eli's cries and the moan of the wind. He dropped to his knees beside Whisper. Her body was still warm. He pressed his hand to her neck, searching for a pulse. There was one, faint and stubborn. "You hang on," he whispered. "You hear me? You hang on." Eli buried his face in her mane, sobbing. "She was trying to protect me again," he said. Jack wrapped an arm around the boy, feeling the tremor in his own chest. "She's not done yet." Together, they dragged a tarp over her, working by lantern light. Jack's shoulder throbbed where the man had hit him, but he didn't stop. He built a wall of hay around her to block the wind, his hands shaking so bad he could barely tie the knots. By dawn, the snow had stopped. Whisper lay breathing in shallow bursts, her body half covered in frost. Jack sat beside her, rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the horizon. He knew they'd be back. Eli slept against his side, worn out from tears. Jack brushed the boy's hair from his forehead and looked toward the ridge. In the first gray light, he saw crows circling, dark and deliberate. He didn't pray often anymore, but now he did. Quietly, without words. Because whatever storm had started that night, he knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And this time, he wasn't going to run from it. The morning after the attack bled into silence, a silence so thick it felt wrong. Jack Mercer stood outside the barn, his breath curling into the frozen air as he stared toward the ridge. The snow glittered like broken glass under the pale sun, and every sound seemed muffled, trapped beneath that white stillness. It was the kind of quiet that came only after something had been taken. Inside, Whisper lay under a blanket of burlap and hay, her breathing shallow but steady. The tranquilizer had mostly left her system, but the bullet wound along her shoulder still bled slow and dark. Eli refused to leave her side. His small hands kept brushing her mane, as though touch alone could keep her alive. Jack moved through the barn like a ghost. He'd cleaned his rifle, patched the holes in the cabin walls, and burned the attacker's footprints from memory. What he couldn't clean was the image of Whisper collapsing, the weight of her body, the sound it made when she hit the earth. That sound had followed him into sleep, then followed him back out again. He was checking the oil in the truck when Nora Bell's Jeep roared up the trail. She climbed out before the engine stopped, snow crunching under her boots. "Jesus, Jack," she said, seeing the torn fence, the broken boards. "What the hell happened?" Jack didn't answer right away. His voice was rough when it finally came. "They came for her." "Who?" He handed her the spent dart he'd found in the snow. The sheriff turned it over in her glove. "Industrial-grade tranquilizer," she said. "Same kind used by capture crews. You're sure it wasn't poachers?" "They didn't want money," Jack said. "They wanted her." Nora's jaw tightened. "You need to move the boy out. Whoever they are, they'll come again." "I'm not running," he said. "Jack, I've done that before. Didn't save anybody." The weight in his tone stopped her. She looked past him into the barn and saw the mare lying there, the boy kneeling beside her, the dim orange light of the stove flickering across both. Something in her expression softened. "Then I'll help you keep them alive," she said. They worked until dusk, cleaning Whisper's wound, packing it with salt and boiled herbs from Nora's first aid kit. Jack held the lantern while Nora stitched the torn flesh, her hands steady as a surgeon's. Whisper never cried out. She only trembled once, then went still again, eyes half open, but aware. Eli sat in the straw, whispering a soft tune that sounded like something his mother might have sung. The sound filled the barn, fragile, human, and unbearably kind. When it was done, Jack wiped the sweat from his brow, though the air was freezing. Nora stood, wiping her hands on a rag. "She's tough," she said, "but she's got to rest. Keep her warm." Jack nodded, staring at the mare. "She's got more fight in her than most men I know." Nora left before nightfall, promising to radio the state office. Jack watched her taillights vanish down the valley, then turned back to the barn. The sky had begun to burn pink against the snow, bleeding color into the white world. Inside, Whisper stirred, trying to lift her head. Jack crouched beside her. "Easy, girl," he said softly. "Don't push it." Her breath fogged the air between them. For a long moment he could almost hear her, heart beating alongside his own. Then Eli's small voice broke the stillness. "Jack, will she die?" He looked at the boy and saw the reflection of himself years ago, someone too young to understand why good things were always the ones that bled. "Not if I can help it," Jack said. "Not if we don't give up on her." That night, the storm returned. The wind clawed at the cabin roof, the kind of wind that made the world feel like it could come apart. Jack sat awake by the fire, loading cartridges one by one. The boy slept near the hearth, and Whisper's silhouette shifted faintly beyond the frosted window. When the lantern began to flicker, Jack heard it again. The metallic groan from the ridge, same as the night before. He stood, rifle in hand, and opened the door. The air was thick with snow, but through the haze, he saw light moving along the tree line. Headlamps. He didn't wait. He ran to the barn, grabbed the saddle, and threw it over Boone's back. He turned to Eli, who had woken in panic. "Stay with her," Jack ordered. "Keep that fire high. If I'm not back before sunrise." "Where are you going?" the boy cried. "Finishing what they started." Boone's hooves tore through the snow as they climbed the ridge. The wind screamed against his ears, carrying the smell of oil and smoke. Halfway up, the trail split into two sets of tire tracks. Jack followed the fresher one until the glow of a campfire appeared through the storm. There were 3 men around it, the same silhouettes from the night before. Jack dismounted silently, snow muffling every step. He could hear them talking. "Boss said the mare's tagged," one said. "Said she's worth more than both of us combined." "Boss can wait," another answered. "We got the kids sent. They'll come for her again." Jack raised his rifle, steadying his aim. He wasn't a man built for killing, but some lines, once crossed, can't be walked back. He took a breath and squeezed the trigger. The shot shattered the night. One man dropped, the others diving for cover. Boone reared, startled, as gunfire erupted. Jack fired again, hitting a lantern. Flames burst across the snow, turning the storm into a blur of orange and white. He didn't stay to count bodies. He swung into the saddle and drove Boone back down the ridge, the burning light behind him painting the world in flickering fire. The storm swallowed everything else, the gunshots, the shouting, the smell of smoke. When he reached the barn, Eli was waiting at the door, tears frozen to his face. "Jack! The fire! It's dying!" Jack jumped from the horse, ran inside, and saw Whisper struggling to stand. Her wound had opened again, blood seeping through the bandage. She looked at him, nostrils flaring, eyes wild but determined. "No," Jack said, voice breaking. "Don't you dare!" He knelt beside her, pressing his hands to her neck, feeling the tremor beneath her skin. She leaned into Ato, him, heavy and shaking. Then took one step, just one, and stayed upright. Eli stood back, eyes wide. "She's standing," he whispered. Outside, the storm howled. The orange glow from the ridge danced faintly across the sky, a line of fire twisting through the snow. Jack knew what it meant. He'd burned their camp, but not their will. They would return, angrier and better armed. Still, as Whisper steadied herself and laid her head against his shoulder, he felt something like peace. She was alive. The boy was alive. And for the first time in years, Jack felt alive too. He looked toward the window, where the first gray light of dawn began to seep into the world. "We made it through another night," he said quietly. Whisper's breath warmed the side of his neck, her heartbeat strong again. And outside, on the ridge, the snow hissed softly as the last embers of fire faded into ash. By the time dawn touched the valley, the storm had spent itself. What remained was a world washed pale, quiet, endless, and strange in its stillness. Jack Mercer stood outside the barn, hat in hand, watching his breath fade into the air. The snow glittered under the early light, untouched except for the single trail of hoofprints leading to the ridge and back. They were proof that something fierce had happened here, but now the land wore its silence like a bandage. Inside, the barn smelled of smoke, blood, and warm hay. Whisper lay on her side, wrapped in heavy blankets, her breath deep and slow. The stitched wound along her shoulder had stopped bleeding. She looked half asleep, yet her eyes opened every time Jack spoke, as if to reassure him she was still there. Eli slept beside her, small hand resting on the mare's neck. The boy hadn't said a word since the night before, not even when Jack carried him back to bed. There was a look in his eyes now, older, quieter, like the storm had stolen part of his childhood. Jack knew that look too well. He poured water into a tin basin and washed his hands, his knuckles still raw from the fight. The cuts stung, but he didn't care. Pain was simple. It asked nothing except that you survive it. He'd lived long enough to know survival wasn't the same as living. But when he looked at the boy and the horse, breathing in rhythm, something inside him stirred that he hadn't felt since before the avalanche took his family. The weight of purpose. He spent the day fixing what could be fixed. He mended the broken fence, cleared the snow off the roof, reloaded the truck with the supplies Nora had left. Every sound, the scrape of the shovel, the creak of the barn door, the steady rhythm of Whisper's breathing, became part of a fragile piece he was afraid to break. By late afternoon, sunlight spilled over the ridge, melting the icicles that hung from the eaves. Water dripped steadily into the troughs, marking time. Whisper lifted her head for the first time, her coat catching gold light. Eli stirred, blinking sleep from his eyes. "She's better," he whispered, voice hoarse from silence. Jack knelt beside them, smiling faintly. "Yeah, she's tougher than both of us." Eli ran his hand down Whisper's neck, over the bandages. "Will they come back?" Jack hesitated. The truth sat heavy in his chest. "Maybe," he said. "But next time, we'll be ready." The boy nodded slowly, as if he already understood what readiness cost. That evening, Nora returned. Her truck tires crackled over the ice as she pulled up the drive. She carried a thermos and a folder under one arm. Her eyes scanned the damage: the burned fence line, the bullet holes in the porch post, the smudged trails leading to the barn. She didn't speak until she stepped inside. "Damn," she muttered. "Looks like a war." Jack poured her coffee, strong and black. "Feels like one." She opened the folder and laid a photograph on the table. It showed a man in his 50s, clean-shaven, wearing a dark coat. The name printed beneath it made Jack's blood go cold. Vern Clay, the same man who'd once hired him for a cattle drive years ago. "He's the one running the captures," Nora said. "Private buyer out of Colorado. Word is they're selling the Mustangs to offshore labs for testing. You hit his supply run last night. That's why they came gunning for you." Jack stared at the picture, jaw tight. "He won't stop." "Neither will you," she said, reading his face. "But you can't keep a boy and a half-dead horse in a war zone. You've got to think about what comes next." "What comes next," Jack said, "is keeping them alive." Nora sighed, took a sip of coffee. "You always were stubborn, Mercer. That's going to get you killed." Jack looked out the window, where Whisper stood now, her head raised to the fading light. "Maybe," he said, "but some things are worth dying for." When Nora left, the sky was already bruised with dusk. Jack stayed by the window, watching the last of her taillights vanish into the trees. The wind had died completely, leaving only the faint creak of the barn door. It was strange, this silence, like the world holding its breath. He went outside one last time before sleep. The snow reflected the stars so clearly that it looked like the sky had fallen to earth. Whisper stood in her stall, eyes half closed, her breath a cloud of warmth. Jack rested a hand on her flank. "You rest now," he whispered. "Tomorrow, we start over." The mare shifted slightly, pressing against his palm. Her skin was warm, alive. Jack stayed there until his fingers grew numb from the cold. When he returned to the cabin, Eli was sitting up on the cot, eyes open. "I couldn't sleep," the boy said. Jack sat beside him. "Night's too quiet?" "It's not that," Eli said. "It's just, when the wind stops, I miss her voice." "Whose?" "My mama's," he murmured. "She used to hum when the storms came. Said if you listen close, the wind carries prayers." Jack's throat closed for a moment. He reached out, tucking the blanket around the boy. "Then maybe the wind's resting tonight because it's listening to us." Eli nodded, eyelids heavy. "Do you think she hears?" "I think she never stopped," Jack said softly. The boy drifted off, and Jack sat there in the quiet for a long time. Outside, the ridge loomed dark against the starlit snow, scarred and beautiful. The world had gone still, not dead, just waiting. And for the first time since his wife's last breath, Jack felt that stillness not as emptiness, but as grace. When he finally blew out the lamp, the darkness wasn't cruel, it was gentle, the kind of dark that holds things safe until morning. Winter loosened its grip on Wind River one quiet morning in March. The snow, once endless and merciless, had begun to retreat in thin veins that wound through the pasture like silver streams. Jack Mercer stood on the porch with a hammer in his hand, a plank balanced on his knee, and the faint warmth of sunlight against his back. After months of fighting, the air finally smelled clean again, of pine sap, thawing soil, and smoke from the stove. The valley looked almost forgiving now. Patches of grass pushed through the melting frost. The barn roof gleamed wet and new where he'd replaced the splintered boards. And down by the fence, the first crocus bloomed, purple against the white. Jack smiled without realizing it. He hadn't smiled at something small in years. Whisper was healing faster than anyone had expected. Her coat had grown smooth again, silver bright under the new sun, and the scar on her shoulder had faded to a pale crescent. She still limped slightly, but she carried her head high. Every morning, she followed Eli around the paddock like a shadow, her steps measured, patient, protective. The boy talked constantly now. Stories about his dreams, about the river, about the idea of building a place where no one had to run again. Jack listened more than he spoke. He built. He fixed. He worked until the ache in his hands turned into something steady and useful. Nora stopped by once a week, bringing mail and news. She told him Vern Clay's crew had scattered after the ridge fire. The Bureau was handling it, though both she and Jack knew what that meant. Silence bought with paperwork. One evening, Nora found him painting a sign that leaned against the porch rail. The letters were rough, but honest. Whisper's Haven. Where the lost find home. She raised an eyebrow. You opening a horse sanctuary now, Mercer? Something like that. He didn't look up, just kept brushing slow, careful strokes of black paint onto the wood. Figured maybe this land's tired of being empty. Nora smiled, soft and knowing. And you? Jack paused, the brush hovering midair. Maybe I am too. Inside, Eli laughed, one of those bright, belly-deep sounds that could fill a room. Whisper neighed in answer from the paddock. Nora turned toward the sound, shaking her head. You've got yourself a family again, whether you admit it or not. Jack set the brush down, flexing his hands. Yeah, he said quietly. But this time, I'm not going to lose it. By mid-April, the first rescues began to arrive. Nora had spread the word, and within weeks, 3 injured horses and 1 frightened mule stood inside the rebuilt corral. Jack and Eli worked from dawn to dusk, cleaning stalls, hauling water, patching old harnesses. Whisper became the herd's silent matriarch, nudging the frightened ones forward, standing close when they trembled at human touch. The ranch came alive again. Birds nested under the eaves. The sound of hammers gave way to laughter, to the rhythmic beat of hooves against wet ground. Jack caught himself humming sometimes while he worked. He didn't even realize it until Eli pointed it out. What you singing, Jack? He shrugged. An old tune. My wife used to. Eli tilted his head. Was it for you? Jack smiled faintly. Maybe. Maybe it was for the wind. They planted wildflowers along the fence line. Eli's idea. He said horses liked color, that it made them calm. Jack didn't argue. The boy had an instinct for gentleness that didn't need teaching. At night, when the crickets started their chorus, Jack sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and listened to the quiet pulse of life surrounding him. One night, a storm rolled in. Nothing like the ones that used to tear the valley apart, just a soft rain that made the roof hum. Eli stood barefoot on the porch, arms spread wide, laughing as the drops soaked through his shirt. Whisper stood just beyond the fence, head lifted to the sky, rain streaking down her face. Jack watched them both, feeling the ache in his chest change shape. It wasn't the sharp ache of grief anymore, but something deeper, something that made room instead of taking it away. When the rain stopped, the air smelled of earth and beginnings. Jack carved the last line into the signpost with his pocket knife, the words catching the moonlight as he traced them with his thumb. "Where the lost find home." He mounted the sign by the front gate the next morning. Eli helped hold it steady while Jack drove the final nail. The sound echoed down the valley, a sound that felt like closure. By late spring, the hills turned green again. Whisper's foal was born one quiet dawn, small and silver like moonlight made flesh. Eli named her Grace, because, as he said, that's what Whisper gave us. Jack didn't argue. He couldn't think of a better word. Visitors began to stop by. A rancher from Thermopolis, a teacher from Riverton, a woman who'd lost her farm and brought her blind pony here. Word traveled faster than Jack expected. Soon, the gate at Whisper's Haven opened not just for animals, but for people too. Each carrying something broken, each leaving a little lighter. One evening, when the sun dipped low and turned the pasture gold, Jack leaned against the fence and watched Eli feed the foal. Whisper grazed nearby, her shadow long and graceful across the field. Nora arrived with 2 cups of coffee, handing him one without a word. They stood in silence, watching the boy laugh as the foal nuzzled his hands. "Never thought I'd see this place full again," Nora said finally. "Neither did I," Jack admitted. "Guess the land just needed a reason to breathe." She studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Looks like you did too." Jack chuckled softly. "Maybe that's what this all is, a second breath." The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain and sage. Across the pasture, Whisper lifted her head, eyes glinting in the fading light. Jack met her gaze, and for a heartbeat, he swore she was smiling too. When darkness settled, the lanterns glowed warm against the windows, casting gold light over the fields. The sign by the gate creaked gently in the breeze, its letters catching the moon. For the first time in years, the wind that moved through the valley didn't sound lonely. It sounded like home. By early summer, the valley had turned to green fire. Grass rolled in waves across the hills, and the scent of wild sage clung to every breath. Whisper's Haven had become more than a place. It was a pulse. You could hear it in the steady rhythm of hooves against earth, in Eli's laughter echoing across the paddock, in the quiet satisfaction that lived in Jack Mercer's chest each morning when he stepped outside. He no longer woke from nightmares. The storm that had haunted his sleep for years had gone silent, replaced by a softer memory, the sound of rain on the barn roof, a boy's voice reading to a horse, and the gentle breathing of creatures that trusted him. Jack had found peace, though he'd never call it that. Peace, he figured, wasn't a prize you earned. It was what was left when you finally stopped fighting everything you'd already lost. The ranch had grown in quiet ways. Volunteers from nearby towns came on weekends, retired ranchers, high school kids, women who'd once trained show horses but didn't have the heart for competition anymore. They mucked stalls, mended fences, and stayed long after sunset. Sometimes they didn't even talk. They just listened to the wind move through the grass. It was enough. Whisper watched over them all. Her foal, Grace, had grown quick and curious, darting through the pasture with an energy that seemed to lift the whole place. Eli followed her everywhere, his small legs pumping to keep up. Jack swore the two of them shared a secret language, one made of laughter and motion, and something wordless that only children and animals remember. One evening, Nora Bell came by with a box of tools and a grin that said she'd brought news worth telling. "Remember Vern Clay?" she asked, leaning on the porch rail. Jack's eyes narrowed. "The man who started all this?" "He's gone," she said simply. "Car crash out near Cheyenne. No charges, no trial. Just gone." Jack stared out toward the hills. He didn't feel relief or triumph, just the strange emptiness that follows justice arriving too late to matter. "Guess the wind decided his reckoning," he murmured. Nora nodded. "Maybe now you can stop looking over your shoulder." "I stopped weeks ago," Jack said. "Been too busy looking forward." She smiled, handed him a sealed envelope. "This came through the bureau. Official paperwork. Whispers off the books now. She's yours. All legal." He took it, but didn't open it. The mare didn't belong to him. No creature like her ever could. She was part of something larger, an echo of all the things people tried to cage and couldn't. Still, he thanked Nora, knowing the gesture mattered more than the paper. That night, Jack walked the fence line. The sun had sunk low, turning everything bronze. The sky was wide and open, stretching forever. Whisper followed a few paces behind, her foal trotting at her side. Jack stopped near the gate and looked out toward the ridge where it had all begun, the place where snow once swallowed the world. "You remember that storm?" he asked quietly, half smiling. "I thought it was going to finish us." Whisper blew a slow breath through her nostrils, ears twitching as if in agreement. Grace pressed her nose against Jack's hand, warm and soft. "Yeah," he said. "You saved us instead." He stood there until the stars started to come out. Each one felt like a word written by someone wiser, someone saying, "You're still here." Later, after the lights in the cabin had dimmed and the pasture fell still, Jack sat alone on the porch, notebook open in his lap. He hadn't written in years. Now the words came like water breaking through ice. He wrote about storms and survival, about love that doesn't ask to be understood. He wrote about the Mustang who gave everything to protect a child, and the child who gave a broken man a reason to live again. When he was done, he signed his name at the bottom. For Whisper. Then he tore the page free, folded it once, and tucked it beneath the post of the new gate. Let the wind have it. Let the story belong to the valley now. The following morning was clear and bright. Eli was already outside, chasing Grace through the meadow, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Whisper stood at the far end of the field, watching them. Her mane rippled like a river of light. Jack leaned on the fence, his heart steady and full. Sometimes, when the wind shifted just right, he swore he could hear another sound underneath it, the faint echo of hooves in the snow. The memory of a night when everything had almost ended, but didn't. Nora stopped by around noon. "You ever think about expanding this place?" she asked. "More stalls? Maybe a proper training pen?" Jack chuckled. "You mean make it official?" "It already is," she said. "You just haven't admitted it yet." He looked over the fields where the grass bent in the wind, where Eli's laughter still rang, where Whisper stood unbroken and alive. "Yeah," he said after a while. "Maybe it is." As the afternoon light faded, he saddled Boone for a slow ride through the valley. Whisper and her foal followed at a distance, their shapes framed by the amber glow. From the ridge, he could see everything. The river cutting through the plain, the distant roofs of the town, the trail that led back to a life he no longer needed. He dismounted and stood with his hat pressed to his chest. The wind rose, brushing against him like an old friend. In that moment, he thought of all the things love leaves behind, not just the pain or the loss, but the quiet places it fills afterward, the laughter, the scars, the courage to start again. He turned to Whisper, who stood beside him now, eyes deep as dusk. "We made it, girl," he said softly. "All of us." The mare flicked her ears, her breath warm against his sleeve. Grace nuzzled his boot, impatient and alive. Jack laughed, a full, honest laugh that startled the quiet into joining him. Down below, the sign at the gate caught the last beam of light. Whisper's Haven, where the lost find home. And as the wind moved through the valley, it carried the sound of hooves, a child's voice, and the soft, unending heartbeat of something finally free. If this story touched your heart, tell me what part stayed with you the most. Do you believe animals can feel love the way we do? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you'd like to hear more true, heartfelt stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. The next story might just remind you of something you've almost forgotten.